Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to the inaugural Harvard-Zaytuna Symposium. It is really my honor as your sister in Islam, as the president of the Harvard Undergraduate Theological Society, and as a huge fan of Zaytuna, and as a student of Harvard University, to welcome you to this momentous occasion. I would initially like to offer you some opening remarks. From there, we will transition into some recitation of the Quran by Abdul Aziz. We will then transition into a translation. We will then transition into opening remarks by Dr. Abdul Rashid, who is the chaplain here at Harvard University. And we will then transfer into a small piece of music prepared. And then we will start what you have all been waiting for, which is our inaugural lecture. So first, I would like to quickly just introduce what this is. So many years ago, in 1636, Harvard University was founded as the first institution of higher education in the United States, with a Puritan Congregationalist foundation focused on training ministers and clergy. Today, Harvard is one of the most prestigious and highly rated universities in the world, producing scholarship within an array of disciplines while also bringing together students and academicians from around the globe. In its beginnings, Zaytuna College is the first and only Muslim undergraduate college in the United States, with many similarities to Harvard's inception so long ago. We hope that this endeavor will mark the first step in establishing a long and beneficial relationship between Harvard and Zaytuna. On behalf of the organizing committee, we are delighted to have had the opportunity to play a role in fostering this new relationship in the pursuit of upholding truth and serving humanity through academia. We wish it may continue for years to come in the hopes of nurturing bonds of love, devotion, and learning. At this time, I'd like to recognize the organizing committee. They have put in hours of time. I'd like to actually share how this program started. I will start by introducing Aqid and Hamdi. If you guys could please wave your hands or at least show yourself to the crowd. Where is Hamdi? Is Hamdi grabbing something or doing something right now? These individuals reached out to me with an idea. And when I first heard the idea, I told them, this is my dream. To be able to do this is my dream. I told them there have been many attempts, and oftentimes these things can start off as small sparks of energy and eventually die down. But I think it was with taysir, it was with righteous intentions, that step after step after step, we saw this coming to fruition. And it is really only by the barakah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you are all gathered here today to establish something so momentous as this. I'd like to also introduce the organizing committee members on behalf of Zaytuna. Fatima, if you can raise your hand or show yourself to the crowd. There she is. And Danny in the back, also a senior at Zaytuna, who has been critical in helping us. I'd like to introduce the master students who are part of the organizing committee. We have Tulaib, who is a PhD in Quranic studies here at Harvard. And we have Amin Qureshi, who is here with us from Japan at Harvard Divinity School. Could we please offer them a round of applause for helping us put this together? I'd like to just say that this is a gift, and I pray that we can all be, that we can all be lights in an ebony night of sort. I think we all can relate to what that means, and hopefully leave here as facilitators, as witness to the power of what the Islamic tradition holds and what it can offer to the modern world. With that, I'd like to invite Abdul Aziz to come offer some recitation, and then we will transition into translation. Thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الذين يتلون كتاب الله وأقاموا الصلاة وأنفقوا مما رزقناهم سرا وعلانية يرجون تجارة لن تبور ليوفيهم أجورهم ويزيدهم من فضله إنه غفور شكور. والذي أوحينا إليك من الكتاب هو الحق مصدقا لما بين يديه إن الله بعباده لخبير بصير. ثم أورثنا الكتاب الذين اصطفينا من عبادنا فمنهم ظالم لنفسه ومنهم مقتصد ومنهم سابق بالخيرات بإذن الله ذلك هو الفضل الكبير. جنات عدن يدخلونها يحلون فيها من أساور من ذهب ولؤلؤا ولباسهم فيها حرير. وقالوا الحمد لله الذي أذهب عنا الحزن إن ربنا لغفور شكور. الذي أحلنا دار المقامة من فضله لا يمسنا فيها نصب ولا يمسنا فيها لغوب.
In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Surely those who recite the book of God and perform the prayer and expend that which we have provided them, secretly and in public, look for a commerce that comes to naught, not to naught, that he may pay them in their full wages and enrich them of his bounty. Surely he is all forgiving, all thankful. And that we have revealed to thee of the book is the truth, confirming what is before it, God is aware of and sees his servants. Then we bequeathed the book on those of our servants we chose. But of them some wrong themselves, some of them are lukewarm, and some are outstrippers in good works, by the leave of God. That is the great bounty. Gardens of Eden they shall enter. Therein they shall be adorned with bracelets of gold and with pearls, and their apparel there shall be of silk. And they shall say, praise belongs to God, who has removed all sorrow from us. Surely our Lord is all forgiving, all thankful.
All right, I'd now like to introduce Zui Zhao. He's a pianist from Boston University who will be playing for us Mozart Fantasia in C minor. Can we please have one more round of applause for that beautiful piano piece? And you want to know the truth? There was no practice. There was no preparation. I just invited Zui to play less than an hour and a half ago. So that just speaks to Zui, and we thank you and we appreciate your time. Thank you. I now would like to introduce Chaplain Khalil Abdul Rashid to offer some opening remarks for this event. Chaplain has been a pillar for this community. Him and his wife, Chaplain Samia, offer so much, both in terms of moral support, spiritual support, and so it's really my honor to be welcoming my mentor to the stage. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Peace and blessings be with all of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm not going to take a long time, so I won't be speaking in the spirit of chaplaincy today. But what I hope to do is just to remind myself and everyone here of what it is that we are supposed to be doing, and to remind us of what it means to participate in a symposium like this. Certainly, on behalf of Chaplain Sami and myself, we extend a tremendous humble welcome to Shaykh Hamza, Yusuf, to Dr. Aisha, Dr. Rayan, of course, Dr. Omar Qureshi, Sheikh Mashouk, to all of the distinguished students of Zaytuna, to our community and to our campus. And it is really important just to keep something in our frame of mind, in our backgrounds, in our foregrounds, in our hearts and minds and spirits. And that is what happens when we encounter knowledge and ilm. There's a difference between information and ilm. Ilm is a term of sacred knowledge. And we meet all the time. We have different encounters. But there are two ways to meet. You can meet, you can have an encounter and then you part and you go back. And there's not really much of an impact that it has. Similar to what's called the Majma' al-Bahrain, the place where the two seas meet. And there's no overlap. But then there's the other encounter where you encounter things in your environment, you encounter knowledge specifically and people of knowledge, and you take from them, and in the spirit of what the Quran talks about, the honeybee, you go from flower to flower, right? And you take and you absorb. And the metaphor or the example of the honeybee is what I'd like to leave with all of us today and set the stage. That the honeybee, particularly the Quranic example of the honeybee, is really important. That our role in engaging in the world, particularly as Muslims, is such that we are supposed to be the kind of people that engage, that benefit, that absorb, and that give back, that produce. يَخْرُجُ مِن بُطُونِهَا شَرَابٌ. First, Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, ثُمَّ كُلُوا مِن كُلِّ الثَّمَرَاتِ, that the honeybee has been commanded to go and to derive from different flowers, different fruits, go to different places, learn different things, ingest, absorb, consume, if you will, take things in. So you learn, you benefit, you sit with teachers, you meet people, and you absorb. But not just absorb, but you digest. يَخْرُجُ مِن بُطُونِهَا. And that digestion then becomes something different. And so we are meant to not just take in information, we are meant to produce something new from the experiences that we have, particularly with our teachers. And this format in tonight's lecture by Shaykh Hamza and the guests that we have here, these are teachers of ours, and they represent the teachers in our tradition. And this symposium represents the teachings of our tradition in dialogue and discussions. And this is really important in a climate where there's a lot of polarization and not a lot of desire to sit at the table and have dialogues and discussions and understand how to come to terms with each other, how to encounter difference, and how to respectfully navigate those differences. And then how to produce something for the world to benefit in the spirit of the honeybee. The product that comes out is shifa'un linnas, is something that is of healing to not just one community, but to everybody. So our hope and our purpose for what may blossom from this inaugural lecture, this inaugural symposium, is that we may be inspired, we may be moved, we may be shaken, we may be stirred, we may be uplifted to be able to improve ourselves so that we'll be in a better position to walk the path of being subjects who produce a product that is healing to the maladies that afflict our communities, our country, and even our own selves. And so I'll leave you with the advice of my first teacher, the very first person in my life when I was a young man, I was 19 years old, who taught me the very first lessons of Islam. And he was teaching, and he was dying of cancer. He was dying of bone cancer. And he used to come to class. He was never late. I was the one at 19 who was late. He was never late. And he used to say that, what you're learning is not information. What you're learning is prophetic bequeaths, knowledge from the prophets. And we have a responsibility to pass that on, and we pass it on not just through words, but with beings who we are. And so I will close so that we can understand better what that means. I wish all of you a warm welcome this evening. May Allah Ta'ala be with you and bless you, and may we help us unite ourselves so that we may be standard bearers in this life and in the life to come to what is healing and what is beautiful and what is praising. Thank you very much. Good evening. Assalamu alaikum.
The inaugural lecture, or the lecture that will happen with the symposium, intends to create a space to feature prominent scholars and public intellectuals from each institution as an opportunity for the whole community to learn and gain knowledge. This year, the inaugural speech features Shaykh Hamza Yusuf presenting The Arts of Understanding, Prerequisites for Unlocking the Islamic Tradition. He is the co-founder and president of Zaytuna College and arguably the most influential Islamic scholar in the West. But I think for the majority of us in the room, this is a man who has shaped who we are, who has brought us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and who we are incredibly blessed to have joining our community tonight. Please welcome Shaykh Hamza Yusuf.
Uh-oh. My wife usually does this. Yeah, thank you. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. الحمد لله نحمده. Praise God in a place where God is meant to be praised, because the founders of this place founded it as a place to actually produce ministers that would go and minister the community. So Harvard's grown much since those early days. First of all, I'm very honored to be back here. I haven't been here probably in over 30 years, but I did come and lecture before and had a very interesting time, and had a wonderful time in the bookstores, and I hope they're still there, because I know they're disappearing these days. Everybody's going on Amazon, which is not a wise thing to do, but people are doing it anyway. So alhamdulillah, I want to say that this is, I think, a wonderful thing that our students, we're a fledgling school in California, and Harvard is a well-established bastion, really, of knowledge on many, many different levels. So we're humbled and honored to be here, and we're certainly grateful for Sister Jannah for doing the hard work with her team. We're certainly very, very grateful to Dr. Khalid Rawayhib, somebody I know all the faculty at Zaytuna hold in high esteem for his extraordinary scholarship and contribution to this tradition. So I think Harvard's very fortunate to have somebody of his caliber here. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Before I get into what I wanted to talk about, I know many of you know this already, but for those of you who don't, the second president of Harvard University, his name was Charles Chauncey, and he was 1592 to 1672. In the mid-17th century, he became a professor and the president of the school. He had studied in Cambridge, in England, and obviously, as you know, Cambridge, Massachusetts was meant in some ways to reflect Cambridge, England, the great hope that the Americans would develop great schools and colleges like Oxford and Cambridge. But what's interesting is Chauncey boasted that he knew more Arabic than any other person in the American colonies. And he's the one that introduced Arabic into Harvard. I was really struck by the fact that Noah Webster, who's one of the unsung founding fathers, he's really the founder of the American language in many ways, because he really wanted to have a language that was independent of English and to create an American English. Very proud of it. There's a very interesting book called Founding Grammars, which is about this fight between Noah Webster and Lindsley Murray. Murray was an Anglophile. He was an American who ended up going back to England, but he wanted to see an English established in America. So this is a classic problem with linguists. Webster was more of what we would call a descriptivist, and Lindsay was a prescriptivist. And we're still having these debates today, believe it or not. The Kufans and the Basrans had these debates. The Kufans are closer to the descriptivists, whereas the Basrans were more descriptivists. So they did not like this kind of open-ended approach to language. He studied in Cambridge at a time there was a fellow in Cambridge, Edward Pocock, at the same time. Now, Pocock had gone to Aleppo and spent 4 years studying Arabic and bringing a lot of manuscripts back to Cambridge, and these became, to Oxford, I think. These became the Pocock Library. So there was a great interest in all things Arabic. Noah Webster, who wrote his book, it was published in 1828, he tried to prove that English, all languages derive from Hebrew. But what he found, that he found more relations to Arabic than to Hebrew in the book. So you will find, and I don't know where they got typesetters typesetting in the 1820s in America, the Arabic typesetting was quite extraordinary. So he has things like cave, that clearly came from kahf, earth, that clearly came from ard, baby, that clearly came from babus. So he has all these funny derivatives back to Arabic. So that's, we still use Webster's dictionary. So that was a little aside, little footnote for those of you who might not have been aware of that. So what I wanted to talk about the arts of understanding, prerequisites to unlocking the Islamic tradition. The Islamic tradition is not an easy one to unlock for a number of reasons. One, it has a very, very difficult language at its foundation, which is the Arabic language. Arabic, I call it what the Arabs call great poetry and great oratory, as-sahl al-mumtana', the easy impossible. There are elements to Arabic that are extraordinarily accessible. People can learn it quite quickly. It has amazing patterns. You can learn these patterns. But the older you get, the more you realize how impossible this language is to actually master. And this is why in Mauritania, they say, لا يحيط بالعربية إلا نبي. No one can really know all of Arabic except a prophet. It has one of the richest vocabularies in the world. It's also retained qualities of ancient languages. And due to the Quran, it has not developed in the same way that many other languages have developed. Like English, for instance, we once had a dual in English. We also had inflections, so we had inflected language. A lot of that has been removed from the English language. So Arabic is very difficult, and there's a very interesting view about what the first language was in the Islamic tradition. There are different opinions about it. Was it Arabic? Was it Syriania? Was it some unknown language? Imam Asyuti says, "من عجائب ما ترى العينان أن سؤال القبر بالسرياني." One of the strangest things is that the questions in the grave will be in Syriania. Well, there's a relationship, obviously, between Syriania, these Semitic languages, with Hebrew and Arabic. So why am I so interested in the liberal arts? Partly because I was brought up in that tradition. My father was a liberal artist. He was very committed to the liberal arts. He'd studied in Columbia when John Erskine had introduced a core curriculum. And Mortimer Adler was there, and the great Mark Van Doren, who wrote a book called Liberal Education, worth reading if you can find it. But I grew up in this, hearing from my father these things, especially the importance of these fundamental knowledges, that without them it becomes very difficult to penetrate pre-modern works. Well, when I became Muslim and went over to the Middle East, and I started studying, particularly with Mauritanians, what really struck me was their emphasis on the same things that my father had talked about in Latin and Greek. Things like the importance of grammar, the centrality of logic, the importance of rhetoric. These were all things that were really emphasized. And then as I grew into understanding the Islamic tradition more and more, what I realized is it really was a parallel tradition of liberal arts alongside the Western tradition. So where do they come from, these arts? They're surrounded in mystery. The obviously Eurocentric view would like to claim that they came from Greece, but we know that the ancient Indians were involved in grammar. They had their types of logic. They were certainly understood what beautiful language was, but very often it's associated with Pythagoras of Samos. He's shrouded in mystery himself because most of the writings about him are 200 years after he died. But he was certainly very interested in the mathematical arts. This is a beautiful painting that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, the School of Athens. It shows Plato and Aristotle. Plato looking up to the heavens, Aristotle with his hand towards the earth. This idea of these two approaches, the one, the Platonic, which is really to study the heavens, and then the Aristotelian, that we should study the earth, and the idea that we need both of these. What's interesting is they have Averroes there, and he kind of looks like he's maybe cheating there with Pythagoras. You know, he's definitely trying to catch some knowledge from what's being written on that page. So this is really one of my favorite pictures. It's a young man. He's a student. He probably looks like he's a beardless student, so he's probably early adolescence, maybe 12, 13. Most people who did go to college, finished by 15, generally, at that time. But he's being led into the 6 liberal arts by grammar. They're personified as beautiful women, the idea that the young man should pursue them like he would pursue a beautiful woman with great passion, great desire, and purpose. If you look, there's symbols that go with the art. So for instance, you can see the woman holding the scorpion. The scorpion was actually for dialectic. Sometimes it was symbolized with a snake, but it was for dialectic, which is, when somebody has a good proof, it's like getting stung by a scorpion. You have to submit to it. And then over the 7 is prudentia. And prudentia is wisdom, prudence. In Arabic, Imam al-Ghazali in the Mizan al-Amal, he talks about the hikmah nadariya and hikmah amaliya. Hikmah nadariya is what we would call in Latin prudentia, prudence. So the wisdom, the idea of wisdom is practical wisdom, hikmah amaliya, as opposed to theoretical wisdom, which is hikmah, what the Greeks called sophia, as opposed to phronesis. These were the terms. So these are very important distinctions. So she is basically the embodiment of phronesis. When we, if a physician is sued, they will have testimony from people who will testify what a prudent doctor would have done in the situation. Practical wisdom. And so prudentia is really got her bow there, because the idea is that wisdom enables you to hit the target. And in Greek, amartia, New Testament Greek, amartia, in Hebrew, in Arabic, and in Old English, the terms for sin are all archery terms, which mean to miss the mark. So when you sin, it's actually, this is the Socratic idea that it's actually ignorance, that when people behave wrongly, they do so out of ignorance. They mistook an apparent good for a real good, and they went after it, whether it was pleasure or something else. So these liberal arts, which emerge in our civilization, and they are taught and embodied in these extraordinary universities like the University of Paris, Oxford, Cambridge. And then they come to the United States, Harvard, 1636, Princeton, Yale. These are the great civilizational entities. So what's the history of the liberal arts in the Muslim world? Well, there's debate about where the university, the idea of university begins. But the Arabic word for university is usually jami'ah, which means comprehensive. So it's the comprehensive studies. Sometimes they use kulliyah, which is more for college, but again, it has the idea of the universal, the kulliyah. And so the idea is that you should be studying holistically. One of the things that C.S. Lewis, in his extraordinary work on the discarded image, he laments the loss of holism in our understanding of the world, in our understanding of education. We now study all these disparate subjects, but don't really have any way of pulling them together. I mean, the physicists are looking for this theory that's going to make everything make sense. They're looking for a holistic view in physics. But what about a holistic view that ties everything together? Because the ancients really looked at the world that way. They saw everything as being related to everything else. They didn't see any مَا تَرَى فِي خَلْقِ الرَّحْمَنِ مِنْ تَفَاوُتٍ. They did not see any fissures in the creation of God. They saw that it was all somehow united. So Zaytuna College, which we named Zaytuna after, was founded in 737. It was actually preceded by the great university in Qayrawan, which after some Tunisians fled to Fez during some civil strife, they moved into a quarter of Fez called the Qarawiyyin, which means the people from Qayrawan, from Tunis. Well, there was a woman there, Fatima al-Fihriya, who inherited a massive amount of money with her sister Maryam from her father, who was a Tunisian merchant. And I think a lot of Western people don't know how many great institutions were built by women because they did get inheritance in the Islamic tradition. In fact, as late as the late 19th century, if you read Florence Nightingale's her travel log to Egypt, she actually studied the inheritance laws and was upset that we didn't have more progressive laws like these in England. So she was quite struck by the inheritance laws. She actually learned quite a bit. I actually wrote an article many years ago called Florence of Arabia. You might want to take a look at. She actually went into a mosque and in Cairo, and she said, I kept hearing my heart. She was a Unitarian. She said, I kept hearing my heart say, turn to Mecca, turn to Mecca. And I felt as if I'd found the religion I was finally looking for. And then these men shooed her out. And she said, oh, if only there was a place for women in this religion. I could say I found my home. Quite sad. In any case, I've seen those men who do that. You know, they don't always just shoo women out. They shoo men out sometimes too. In any case, Florence, wonderful lady. She was quite a theologian. People don't know she actually she edited Jowett's translations of Plato. So she's quite a stunning scholar in her own right. She also introduced statistics. These are all asides. She introduced statistics into medical studies. So that, believe it or not, is somebody who I should know, but I don't really know, but it is a younger version of the person standing before you. I'd like to talk to him personally, but don't have a chance. So I'll leave it at that. But I was fortunate enough to actually sit on the chair of grammar in the Qarawiyyin, where we were studying the Ajurumiyya. And the reason, as George Maqdisi shows in The Rise of Colleges, they called it a chair was because the only one that got to sit on the chair was the teacher. So when you talk about chair of the department, that's why they call it a chair. So that actually came from the Muslim world. Al-Azhar University, which interestingly enough was founded by the Fatimiyya, which was a part of the Shia tradition. And then later on, when Salahuddin al-Ayyubi comes, he makes it a Sunni bastion. It has an extraordinary history and is still one of the largest universities in the world. It's quite extraordinary. The University of Timbuktu, which I actually visited, is amazing in Sankuri. This is in, if you read Rodney's book on how Europe underdeveloped Africa, a lot of it deals with this area of Africa. But if you haven't read it, there's a beautiful book called, pardon my French here, The Badass Librarian of Timbuktu, which is about how this man here saved all the manuscripts when ISIS showed up. And it was done with the Germans who sent him canisters, and they were able to put them into waterproof canisters and sail them down to Mopti to prevent them from being burnt by these fanatics. So he's an amazing man. And we don't even know what's in a lot of these places. David King reminds us that there are tens of thousands of manuscripts that have never been read yet. So he says we really don't even know what they knew in mathematics, let alone in other subjects. The Zahiri is another one. So now just look at the subjects. So obviously Revelation is central. It's central to the Jewish tradition, to the Muslim tradition, and to the Christian tradition. But how do we understand Revelation? Augustine wrote a very beautiful book on Christian doctrine, making an argument that it was absolutely necessary to know these arts before you actually interpret Revelation. We have these ministers in some places, you know, I mean, very often their families are their only flock, but I mean, these are people that really have not studied grammar, and yet they're reading the Bible and interpreting the Bible. if you do read the Bible, you should know what a conditional sentence is. It's very important. You could really mistake what you think God is saying if you don't know grammar. So grammar is very important. So these revealed religions put an immense emphasis on grammar, and none more so than the Muslims, because much of the Jewish emphasis comes after they begin to interact with the Muslims. So you will see the first Jewish Hebrew dictionaries come after they're introduced into dictionary making by the Muslims. It's quite stunning how heavily indebted much of the Jewish tradition is, and the Jewish scholars will admit this and do so in their writings, which is why much of that great period they wrote in Arabic as opposed to writing in Hebrew. So Musha bin Mamun is often read in Arabic because he originally wrote many of his treatises in Arabic. So you had this revealed religion, then how do you understand it? Well, human beings are divided into these two ways of knowing the world. One is the trivium and the other is the quadrivium. And basically this is the idea of quality and quantity. So the qualitative sciences, and I'm using science in scientia in the old pre-modern way, not in the modern way that we've reduced it to material sciences. Grammar was seen as a ilm, as a science. So grammar, logic, and rhetoric, this was the triad, the thaluth in Arabic, sina'at al-thalath. And the most important was considered grammar, because without it, you could not go to the other two. And then the idea of revealed religion, you had law, jurisprudence, theology, exegesis, readings, the qira'at, prophetic traditions, many other subjects, but I'm giving just an overview. The Muslims became obsessed with the quadrivium. They really got very interested. They got from the Greeks and from the Indians also, because they were syncretists. Wherever they went, they would take the books, translate them into Arabic, into Persian, and study them. And for a long time, there was a belief simply that they were the caretakers. This was a common trope in Western academia, that they simply held the Islamic tradition in abeyance, the Western tradition. And then at a certain point, they just handed it over to Europe, and then Europe, of course, took it to another level. Well, the truth is far, far different from that. George Sarton, who was here at Harvard, wrote an extraordinary history of science. 2 volumes of that 6-volume work deal almost entirely with Muslim scientists and their contribution to science. So there was heavy contribution in all of these areas. Harmony is very interesting because Al-Farabi wrote a book that's amazing. It's called Kitab al-Musiq al-Kabir, the big music book. And they were inventing instruments, adding the famous addition of the fifth for the quintessence, because a lot of this was based on pre-modern ideas like the 4 elements. So the oud, there was a 5th string added to it, and then you had the 6th string added with the guitarra, the Spanish guitar, 6 being a perfect number. So very interesting things with that harmony. So here, this was the idea that if you mastered these sciences, then the grammar would give you facts, data, terms, basic skills. The logic would give you the ability to know the what and the why of things. And then wisdom, rhetoric was the proper use of it in conveying it to others, persuading others of the truth. Very important. Many, many examples of this. We have many, many little couplets and things like this telling us of the importance of grammar. Things like إن رمت إدراك العلوم بسرعة فعليك بالنحو القويم ومنطقي هذا هذا ميزان العقول مرجح والنحو إصلاح اللسان إن تنطقي. So saying like, if you want to learn quickly, then study logic and sound grammar, because logic will teach you how to think properly, and grammar will rectify your tongue. ومن البيان خذ دليلا للحجة, and from rhetoric Take a dalil for your intellect. Tasmu bayn al-wara. Tasmu bihi bayn al-wara in tantaqi. You will be elevated amongst people whenever you speak. So there's the trivium right there. So, and there are many, many Arabic couplets or triplets that talk about that. The quadrivium I'm not going to go into. It's a fascinating subject, and obviously extraordinarily developed in our civilization. Leibniz and Newton adding an extraordinary tool to really facilitate rapid works in math. The great, he won the Nobel Prize for quantum dynamics, Richard Feynman. In Cal Poly, I actually listened to his lectures. They were fascinating. But in Cal Poly, he described physics as the expanding horizon of our ignorance. But he said that he always taught the freshman seminar using only geometry and in physics. And a lot of the students hated it because they all knew calculus was much easier. He said, well, the reason I do this is sometimes you get into a horse and buggy for the sheer enjoyment of the ride. So, and MIT is still very serious about geometry. So what was the purpose of all this? Like, why were they doing all this study? What was the purpose? Well, one of our great, great scholars, Abu Nasr, Imam al-Tusi, Nasiruddin al-Tusi, who, interesting enough, died the same year that Aquinas did. He was a Shia scholar, but the Sunnis always taught his books. In the great Ottoman tradition, the Kurdish tradition, they taught Tajrid al-Aqaid. His Ilm al-Hay'a was taught, many, many other books, because he was a genius and he was well worth studying. So he says in his Nasirian Ethics, Akhlaqi Tusi, which was written in Persian, although translated about 300 years ago into Arabic, and really an excellent translation. He says basically that happiness is of three kinds: psycho-spiritual, bodily, and civic happiness, which relates to the society and civilization. As for the psycho-spiritual happiness, it has already been discussed and its subtypes delineated. It is attained through 5 means. First, character development, tarbiyah. Second, mantiq, he says, which mantiq was short for the trivium. So it's used, often they will use, this is itaq al-ba'd ala al-kull. In Arabic rhetoric, they would use one to indicate everything. It's a type of majaz. It's mursal juz'i, the juz'iyah, right? So he says mantiq, and then mathematics, which was the quadrivium, riyadiyat. Fourth, natural sciences, because they saw that you had to have the methodology before you could study the sciences. And fifth, metaphysics. So the highest was metaphysics. They were taking the student to metaphysics, which they saw, this is book 10 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, that this was the highest thing that a human being could do, is to contemplate reality with a sound mind, a free mind, the mind that had been freed by deep training so that it wouldn't be fooled by its own machinations. Education must be undertaken in this sequence so that the benefit may be speedily accrued in both abodes. And he wrote a beautiful book, which this is from, which deals with the personal ethics, and then economia, which is economics, and then finally the ethics of the society, civics, so politics. And it's interesting because historically, until the late 19th century, economics was part of moral philosophy, so they did not separate it. It's one of the great tragedies of modern studies is that economics is no longer studied as a moral philosophy. And this is partly because the people that study it don't have morals, and they really don't want to learn them, so they're forced to actually think about what they're doing. Yeah, so, I mean, somebody asked me once a Saudi man asked somebody at Harvard, he was a professor, he said, do you teach business ethics there? Do you teach it? That was just after 2008, because I don't know if you know this, but the great Ponzi schemer Madoff, like he actually donated to the business ethics school to Shiva. So, my goodness. That's like penance. So then he says, as for bodily happiness, it is attained through the sciences pertaining to the ordering of body's state, health, such as remedies, preservation of health, and the science of nurturing, which are encapsulated in medicine. So medicine is actually not to manage diseases, which is modern medicine, right? They manage diseases. They don't really cure people, unless they're ER doctors. They're really good. They're the best, right? But a lot of these doctors, unfortunately, become drug pushers for pharmaceuticals, right? Did you know that? Everybody's silent. Oh no, that can't be true. I just went to my doctor. Now I have my albuterol. I'm not being serious, facetious. I've got my albuterol here, so yeah. But they're managing my asthma. They haven't cured it. So you keep paying them. Yeah. That's what they love. Long-term patience. That's why they call them patients. You're just patient with your illness. Yeah. But they actually saw health was a good thing, that you should be healthy. Like, we look around in America, people don't look very healthy. They don't sound healthy. Yeah. So how do we restore health to a society? That's a good question. This is what they were interested in. This also includes knowledge of astrology. Now, they understood that there's two types of astrology that they were dealing with. One of them was more about what they called the amzija. The other, predictive astrology, they all said was prohibited. So they did believe that there was a relationship to times of birth and things like that with the person and their health and things like that. So then he says, civic happiness, this is about politics, is found upon the science related to the ordering of the affairs of the community, the state, daily life, and society, such as sacred knowledge, including sacred law, theology, prophetic reports, exegesis. It also includes worldly disciplines, such as literature, rhetoric, grammar, calligraphy, arithmetic, geometry, calculation, and the like. The benefit of each discipline is in accordance with its appropriate place, and God knows best what is right. So now look at just Thomas Aquinas. Almost at the same time, the 7 liberal arts do not adequately divide theoretical philosophy. But as Hugh of St. Victor says, 7 arts are grouped together, leaving out certain other ones, because those who wanted to learn philosophy were first instructed in them. And the reason why they are divided into the trivium and the quadrivium is that they are, as it were, paths introducing the quick mind to the secrets of philosophy. This is also in harmony with the philosopher's statement in the Metaphysics, meaning Aristotle, that we must investigate the method of scientific thinking before the sciences themselves. And the commentator, meaning Averroes, Ibn Rushd, says in the same place that before all the other sciences, a person should learn logic, meaning the trivium, which teaches the method of all the sciences, and the trivium concerns logic. The philosopher also says in the Ethics that the young can know mathematics but not physics, because it requires experience. So we are given to understand after logic we should learn mathematics, and which the quadrivium concerns. These then are the paths leading the mind to the other philosophical disciplines. So it's the exact same flow of, it's quite extraordinary that both the Muslim world and the traditional Christian world had the same basic idea of what education was for and where it should lead to, but also why. And the reason is this. They saw the 3 most important sciences in the world were medicine, law and politics, and theology and philosophy. And the reason that this is so is they understood that we have a body, we have a social body, and we have a soul. The body has to be physically well so that the soul can thrive. One of the interesting things that the Taoists say is that the reason the Taoists do so many life extension exercises like Qigong is because they actually say that you owe it to your soul to live a long life because it will take that long to rectify your soul before you leave the body. So it's very important that you take care of your soul because you have this time allotted to you, and it's very important to preserve that as best you can. That there's an element of choice in good health. Law and politics was to heal the social body from its ailments, and then theology and philosophy, ethics and psychology were to heal the mental and spiritual body from their ailments. So this was the doctor, the lawyer, and the theologian. These were the great medieval things. So now I'm going to quickly get into just an example. So in the Islamic tradition, and these are the arts that I feel when we come into the Islamic tradition, and I'm speaking to the students of Islamic knowledge in the audience. I know there's some other people here, but in the Islamic tradition, one of the difficulties that we have to remember is this is a sequential tradition. Like in mathematics, mathematics is sequential knowledge. You have to learn at each stage. If you don't learn it sequentially, it's going to break down, which is why the Japanese model is so much better than the American model, because you have to get 100 on every test until they put you to the next level. Because if you take somebody who got a D in arithmetic and you pass them to the next stage, they're completely handicapped. By the time they get down the road, they don't understand anything. Well, the Arabic tradition is sequential in this way, the Islamic tradition, is that it's really buttressed upon certain knowledges if you don't have them. So these ulum al-ala, the instrumental arts, the most important ones were the trivium that I talked about. Ilm al-nahu, ilm al-sarf, matan al-lugha itself, ilm al-balagha. And then you had things that enabled you to work with legislative derivations, what's called usul al-fiqh, qawaid al-fiqhiyya. And then you had the knowledge of Quran, how to read it, orthopy, tajweed, the knowledge of the qira'at, and also the nature of the tafsir of it. Then you had the traditions like the mustalahat al-hadith. If you don't know the terms, you'll have a hard time reading in our tradition because these terms are constantly used. And there's something what E.D. Hirsch called domain knowledge that is expected of the person when you enter into these worlds. And then obviously mantiq. You had mantiq, and Dr. Khalid Ruwayhib has written some really important works on logic in the Arabic tradition and made some really important clarifications in those works. One of them is the separation of material logic from formal logic, which is a big problem that because of Avicenna, so the Sunnis tend not to study material logic anymore, which is a huge disaster. You have to study the two together. But formal logic, which just deals with the validity of your syllogisms and things like that. But material logic deals with the actual matter, the substance of what the premises and the conclusions are made of, which is called mantiq al-qadaya in one iteration. Now in modern Arabic, they actually call it mantiq al-maddi. But it doesn't work. I don't think it's a useful translation. It coming from us. And then adab al-bahth wal-manadira, which is such a beautiful science. So these were the foundation. And then you moved into the ulum al-ghaya, like why you studied these. It was in order to study revelation, which hopefully would lead to a ma'rifah. So you studied the methodology, and then you studied the sciences themselves, which led to this wisdom. I mean, this was the goal. So I just want to use, this is the tradition that I come from, the Mauritanian tradition. This was my teacher, Marbat al-Hajj. He lived to be 112. He was an extraordinary man. He mastered the Mauritanian tradition. He, in the 1930s, he actually walked to Hajj from Mauritania, a journey of 3,000 miles. Amazing stories. He recounted the entire story to me in his tent over several nights. It was quite stunning to hear it. He was somebody who lived the tradition every night. You know, he had me actually live in his tent, which was difficult because the other students were there. And after about 3 months, I actually asked him if I could go live with the students because it was getting a little embarrassing. Just envy creeps in and things like that. So, but during that time, he always woke up about 3 hours before Fajr, and he would start his tahajjud. And he would pray until Fajr every night. He did that. And the people that told me who lived with him, he'd been doing that for 70 years. It was very consistent. He's one of the most consistent people. They said that Kant, that they used to, set their watches with Kant's walk every day in Königsberg. Murabat al-Hajj was like that. You would know exactly what he was doing. He just had something that some traditions call sacred monotony. You know, this idea of just living, recognizing that it really is Groundhog Day, you know, that life really does repeat itself. And then what do you do with those days that you've been given as they accumulate? There's only about 40,000 of them, right? And then they're gone. No, it's actually 20,000. Yeah, I was giving you double. It's not much. So their tradition, and I did not complete it, but I did study in it. So I did study some of these texts, like the Ajurumiyya, Mulhat al-Arab, the Alfiyya. I did not do the Ihmirar or the Kafiya Shafiyya. So if you look, in their tradition, they memorize everything. So 114 lines in Ubaidu Rabbihi, in the Ajurumiyya, 375 in Mulhat al-Arab, 1001 in Ibn Malik's text. Ibn Malik's text, by the way, the Alfiyya, which is now considered advanced grammar, is intermediate grammar. It's an intermediate grammar. It's actually an abridgment of Al-Kafiya Shafiyya, which has 2,793 lines. The Ihmirar, which is Mukhtar wal-Buna's additions to the Alfiyya, is 1,800. My teacher, Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, memorizes not only the 600,083 lines in all of these, but shawahid for almost every rule. So we're looking at tens of thousands of memorized lines. And I'm not exaggerating. I really am not exaggerating. And I will just give you one example. Somebody sent me a text on ishtiqaq, 700 lines in Arabic poetry, from his teacher, Muhammad Salim Wald-Shain. And I was very excited about it. So he was actually staying with us at the time. And I came in with the text. And I said, oh, I found something from your teacher. He said, what was it? And I read the first 2 lines. And he said, yeah, that's for ilm al-ishtiqaq. And then he started reciting it by rote. And he said that I memorized that when I was very young. He said it. And he still had it all there, ready at hand. I was reading once a book by Wald Afa, a Mauritanian scholar in Medina, and it was he was a Medinan historian. And there was a line of poetry in there, and in the footnote it said, I learned this line from Al-Allama Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya in the Mahdara when we were students with his father. And he said, this man was unusual in that he never heard a line of poetry that he liked, except he went, found the qasida and memorized it by rote. Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya told me that, and I know 2 people that did this, that he memorized the entire Jawahir al-Adab of al-Hashmi. Sheikh Khatri wal-Buwayba also memorized that. So it's quite stunning, that memory. We don't have that capacity, but these people do, the Mauritanians, and they really do memorize this. In Sarf, they memorize Lamiyat al-Af'al, Ihmirar of Lamiyat al-Af'al, so you're looking at about 195 lines. And then they do Lugha, Ilm al-Lugha, Muthallath Qutrub, Muthallath Ibn Malik, Diwan Sitt al-Jahiliyin. This is in addition to the mu'allaqat. Some of the mu'allaqat are in there, not all of them, but that's in addition to the mu'allaqat. Maqsura, Ibn Durayd, was a beautiful poem. Diwan Ghaylan, very important for them. It's a very difficult poem. Arabic is very difficult. Maqamat al-Hariri, they memorize the maqamat. The reason for that is for vocabulary acquisition, because there's a lot of really good vocabulary. I actually did read the maqamat, but I preferred Badi'u Zaman al-Hamadani, who I really liked his maqamat. And he had a character called Abu al-Fath al-Iskandari. And Abu al-Fath was what they call Nasab. He was like a religious charlatan. They're all religious charlatans in this genre. But what struck me at the time, I was a little shocked because it was so outrageous. And then I realized that he was really warning people about religious charlatanry, because there are a lot of religious charlatans. So they've always been around. But he had this character, Abu Fath al-Iskandari, who was very eloquent, and he would come into like a village, and he'd tell all the people, oh, I saw a dream of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said that you are a blessed village, but you haven't had rain for several days, and he told me to do a rain prayer with you, but he made a condition, I had to extend the sajda. And they're all like, oh, mashallah, and they all go out, and they do the rain prayer, and they're all in sajda. He gets up, robs all their houses, and then just takes off. You know, it's a very interesting genre of literature. You know, like, watch out, right? That's the message. Somebody comes and tells you, I saw a dream of the Prophet, red flag, right? Yeah, red flag. Keep it to yourself. Yeah. Anytime I hear that, I'm like, uh-oh, watch out, be careful. Yeah. Religious charlatans. Yeah. Put your hand on the television. Can you feel it, brothers and sisters? Send in that money. Yeah. A lot of those. Don't think the Muslims are free of those guys. We have them in a different kind. You know, yeah. They don't get away with it like the poor Christian people. Yeah. You know, and the beauty of the people believe. You know, and the grifter knows, this is the tragedy of the grifter, is he knows that human beings are essentially believers. Like if you meet a guy on a plane and you're sitting next to him and oh, what do you do? I'm a nuclear physicist. Like, yeah, I know what you no, you're not. You say, wow, that's interesting. You know, because people just, why would he tell me when he's really a bus driver? Why would he tell me that? But grifters know that. And that's how they get people. And the worst are the religious ones. Because they're preying on the beliefs of human beings that are very precious. And they're really sinister people. So then we have Balagha. This is the Mauritanian madrasa. Nadam al-Naqaya. I did the Jawhar al-Maknoon. But then they go on. Uqud al-Juman. Nadam Nur al-Iqah. That's from Sidi Abdullah. So that's about 2,240 lines of poetry. Sulam al-Munawraq, Imam al-Akhdari, beautiful little text, informal logic, 142 lines. They do Jawahir al-Mantaqiyya and then Tawshih al-Sulam. So that's their trivium. And then they go into usually fiqh, and they have I did the al-Makhdari, al-Murshid, al-Mu'in, the Risala ibn Abi Zayd, and some sections of Khalil. So I went through that minhaj. But they memorize all of them. I did too. I memorized Al-Akhdari and Murshid and Mu'in, some of the Risala, and very little of the Mukhtasar. But they memorize all of them. Waraqat al-Imam al-Haramain in Usul al-Fiqh, Manhaj al-Muntakhab. These are very difficult books in Qawa'id. And then they do the Quranic sciences. I'm telling you, they do all of these things, and they memorize most of them. So it's really quite stunning. Theology, they usually do Sughra al-Kubra, Muqaddimat, Idah al-Dujunna, Wasirat al-Sa'ada, Wadah al-Mubin. So they don't go into some will read the greater books of Aduddin al-Iji, Imam al-Jurjani. Some will read those, the Muwaqif and the Maqasid. And then in Ulum al-Hadith also, very extensive. In the Sirah, Qurat al-Absar, I translated that. And then in Tasawwuf, they read several books. Alhamdulillah, I was able to read all these books. So that's the amount of poetry they memorize. 33,668 when they finish. And they really do, and they retain it. It's quite stunning to see it. This is the reason why wherever you go in the Muslim world, Mauritanians tend to be the dominant scholars. So in Kuwait now, it's the Shanaqita. In Qatar, it's the Shanaqita. In the UAE, it's the Shanaqita. In Saudi Arabia, increasingly, it's the Shanaqita. They're the teachers in the Haram. You find them in many, many places. In Morocco, too, the Shanaqita. So this works, and that's why they have leadership, is because they went through this tradition. It's a very difficult tradition. It is possible. You don't have to have all the memorization, but I'm going to just wanted to look. I did want to go through this, but I think how long, how much time has gone past? Oh, 1 hour. So I think I was going to go through this nice adab al-bahth wal-munadhara just to show you a later tradition, Adud al-Din al-Iji, and how succinct they became. This is done in, I read this many years ago. I taught it in Malaysia. It's a beautiful little text, but it just shows you how rich. This was done simply for memorization, but there's an immense amount, many commentaries on this text. This is one of the most important books. I wish I knew about this when I first started Arabic. The Turkish and the Kurdish people use this. I once went to a Kurdish bookseller in Istanbul. He's a friend of Dr. Ma'shuq's, and he was so eloquent. And I said that, I asked him, where did you study Arabic? He said, in the Kurdish madrasa. And then I said, what text did you study? He said, and then he told me, حفظت الأجرمية وقطر الندى وألفية ابن مالك وذهبت المتون كلها إلا متنا واحدة. All of them are gone except for one matan. And I said, which one? He said, عوام الجرجاني. And he said, وهذا يكفيني. So I was really impressed with that. So in any case, I was going to go through this just to show you how important it is to learn these things. This is just in harf ba. So in the Mughni, he gives us 14 different uses for harf ba. There's 12 for min. There's all these different types of min. Well, I'm going to open it up for, okay, we could so ta'lil. لقيت بزيد الأسد أي بسبب لقائي إياه, because I met him, right? وامسحوا برؤوسكم. Some say that's for tab'id. That's Imam Shafi'i's position. Imam Malik said ليس في الباء للتبعيض. So Malik actually rejected that. And he actually said it was for ba zaida, which is one of the 14, ba zaida. So you get into differences of opinion, and these are very important. This is why in usul al-fiqh, they go deeply into what are called the huruf al-ma'ani, because this is where the complexity of Arabic really gets. I love this. This is a little mnemonic device that they taught students to learn the 10 categories of Aristotle. زيد الطويل الأزرق ابن مالك في بيتي بالأمس كان متكي بيده غصن لواه فالتوى فهذه 10 مقولات سوا. So you can see there. So you have this Jawhar, the substance, Zayd, Kam, the quantity, Tawil, Kayf, the quality, Azraq, blue, Idafa, the relationship, he's the son of Malik, Fi Baytihi, the place, Bil Ams, the time, Kana Muttaki, the wada', the position, Biyadihi Ghusn, possession, and then Lawahu, action, and then Faltawa, the passive. So those are the 10 categories. Let me this is very interesting, because my argument is that if you do not know the trivium, you will get lost in our tradition. So I just want to show you one example of this from the opening of Ahmad Zarruq's book on tasawwuf. He says in that book, Al-kalamu fi shay far'u tasawwuri mahiyatihi. To speak about a thing is a consequence of conceptualizing its essence. It's a branch. It comes out of conceptualizing its essence. So tasawwur, he means by that what the manatiqa mean, the logicians. It's simple apprehension, right? You understand what something is. You understand its mahiyah. You either do this badihatan or nadaran. You have to contemplate it discursively, or you get it intuitively. The mahiyah is the quiddity. In fact, there's an argument that quiddity comes, quid est, is from the Arabic logicians, mahiyah. What is it? وفائدته ومادته بشعور ذهني مكتسب أو بديهي. So it's either بالاكتساب or بالبداهة. You either get it through acquisition or through intuition. ليرجع إليه في أفراد ما وقع عليه ردا وقبولا وتأصيلا وتفصيلا فلزم تقديم ذلك على الخوض فيه إعلاما به وتحضيضا عليه وإيماء لمعادنه. So he's just giving you all these examples of why that's important. And then he says, ماهية الشيء, the essence of a thing is حقيقته, its reality. Right? حقائق الأشياء الثابتة. قال أهل الحق حقائق الأشياء ثابتة والعلم بها متحقق. This is the foundation of our belief. Like we actually believe that reality is knowable. We're not skeptics. We have a realist tradition, not modern realism, but pre-modern realism. We have a realist tradition. So this is all there, and this is a book on tasawwuf, and he's already using, and then he goes, وَمَا دَلَّتْ عَلَيْهِ جُمْلَتُهُ. So it's what the whole gives you, the surah, the form of it. وَتَعْرِيفُ ذَلِكَ بِحَدٍّ. The way it's defined is through what's called a had, which means that, it's the had is the like had safe. So it's the finitus. It's the end of something. Definition. Definitus. Out of the end of something. It's to get to real and understanding. وَهُوَ أَجْمَعُ. So you're looking for جَامِعٌ مَانِعٌ. That's the type of definition, a comprehensive definition. أو رسم. This is a logical term, description. Like the human being is described as حيوان ناطق, the rational animal. His description is حيوان ضاحك, the risible animal. So risibility, the ability to laugh, is what they call a property, a proprium, khasa. It's not arad am, it's arad khas. Like this is unique. Some say pigs laugh, but his argument basically is that this is unique to human beings. It's a property. Like, the essence, if you took the had of a triangle, you say a triangle is the genus, the jins is polygon. This gets into material logic because you have the categories, which are the modes of being that relate to comprehension, but then you have the predicables that relate to extension. And so when you want to say something about somebody, you're going to be using these. These are the ways that you talk about things. And so what he's saying there is that when you want to define something, you want to give it a had, which is the genus and the difference. What makes it different? So then, what does he say? He says, حد التصوف ورسم وفسر بوجوه تبلغ نحو الألفين مرجعها كله لصدق التوجه إلى الله. So he's saying that the definition, even though it has over 2,000 definitions, all of them go back to صدق التوجه إلى الله. So the genus then is an inner directedness. The difference is it's to God. So he's giving you the definition. So my point is, if you had not studied logic, this would not have made much sense to you. And there is a translation of somebody who did not know logic, and when you read it, you'll see how ridiculous your translation will end up being because you didn't have that tool to study it. I just wanted to use finally, this really is the end, that, this was from the Creed of Imam Tahawi. I have made mistakes in my translation, so this is in no way to fault people. I know people could find mistakes in my translations. We're all learning. Hopefully you don't make big mistakes. But if you look at this passage, which to me was one of the most difficult when I translated Tahawiyah, so الاستطاعة التي يجب بها الفعل من نحو التوفيق الذي لا يجوز أن يوصف المخلوق به فهي مع الفعل وأما الاستطاعة. So that's أما is key, right? أما, so أما is you have أما and إما. So you have to know أما is for تفصيل, right? أما بعد, it's a fasl. So أما الاستطاعة, this is a different استطاعة that he's talking about. So you have to understand, من جهة الصحة. So this translation, the ability required for an action is from divine facilitation, which cannot be ascribed to a created being. So, من نحو التوفيق. So he translates from divine facilitation, which cannot be ascribed to a created being, along with the action itself. So به فهي مع الفعل. It's just not right. As for the ability from the view of health, capacity, capability, and sound means, it is before the action itself, and what is related to these are addressed, as it was said by the exalted. And what is related to these are addressed. Again, it just doesn't make sense. Here's another one. And the ability which deeds occur by is simultaneously with the deeds. This ability is the one depending on Allah's creation of the ability to do good. These are all published, by the way, which is forbidden to ascribe to creation. As for the ability that is associated with health, capability, mastery, and defect-free of instruments, this ability is before the deed, and this is the ability that accountability relates to. So that's correct, that, at least the last part. The capacity of a man is of two types. Capability in terms of tawfiq, which makes an action certain to occur, cannot be ascribed to a created being. There's nowhere to say that. It's amazing. I don't know where he got that. This capability is integral with action, whereas anyway, it goes on. The capability in terms of divine grace and favor, which makes an action certain to occur, cannot be ascribed to a created being. This capability is integral with action, whereas the capability of an action. So, here, the reason I put that in brackets, even though it's not in there, is that the first istita'a is divine enablement that an act requires. And then when he says min nahwa tawfiq, he's really saying for example, an act of obedience or an act of disobedience, right? Which cannot be attributed to a creature, occurs concurrent with the act. As for the material enablement, so that's a different enablement. That's the ummah. That results from health, capacity, poise, and sound means. It precedes the act. In sacred law, it is upon the latter that legal and moral obligations hinge. And I used hinge because muta'allaq, mi'laq is a hanger. You know, it's related to the word. So I always try to find words like wasa'. I use capacity because wasi'a and capacious in Latin, almost identical terms. So it takes a long time to do that kind of translating, but it's really good to try to find those. This is an example of textual corruption that you'll find in the tradition. So this was a fatwa from Mardin. Ibn Taymiyyah was asked about these people that didn't practice Sharia, and he said, بَلْ هِيَ قِسْمٌ ثَالِثٌ. He was asking about Mardin. يُعَامِلُ الْمُسْلِمْ فِيهَا بِمَا يَسْتَحِقُّهُ وَيُقَاتِلُ الْخَارِجُ عَنْ شَرِيعَةِ الْإِسْلَامِ بِمَا يَسْتَحِقُّهُ. So this fatwa was used to kill Sadat. This was in Abu Salam Faraj's book, which told them why they should kill Sadat. This was the fatwa of Mardin that was used. Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayyah held a seminar in Mardin at the time. The fatwa was read. During the fatwa, he said that can't be right. Can't say yu'amalu, yuqatalu. And he knew it from balagha. He said it's not right. You wouldn't say yuqatilu bima yastahiqquhu. And so he asked to see the original manuscript. And the people that were there were some people there from the Gulf who were really upset. They were saying, no, don't change the fatwa. You know. So when they got back, he got somebody from the Maktab al-Zahiriyya to send them the text. And lo and behold, inside the text, this is one of the earliest texts written by the hand of Ibn Muflih, which was one of Ibn Taymiyyah's students. It says yu'amalu. It didn't say yuqatalu. So, I mean, it's very interesting. Big problem. Big difference. So Mardin was a huge problem. So in conclusion, the Muslim education of the Middle Ages is rapidly being superseded by schools and universities, which are both modern and secular. This widespread movement is so recent that it is impossible to tell how it will affect the cultural and social life of Islam. It is clear, however, that in the age of chaotic change, when members of the rising generation are confused by bewildering doubts, the reformers must not neglect the basic principles of medieval education, which were a search of spiritual truth and faith in the reality of Allah. That was the great Bayard Dodge in 1962, who translated the Nasafiyya and other works. And this is a poem, and I'd like to dedicate this talk and this poem to a graduate of Harvard who was one of my mentors who taught at the Zaytuna College. I think he's one of the greatest graduates of Harvard University that they ever had, really. His name was Dr. Thomas Cleary. He spent 6 years here as a student on full scholarship. He did his BA, MA, and PhD in that time, summa cum laude. And he ended up, he learned Arabic here, but he also learned Chinese and Japanese, and ended up translating over 100 works from Chinese, Japanese, Gaelic, Sanskrit, Pali, Bengali, Arabic, and a few other languages. But he was a really, really, truly great scholar. And one of the things that he said that he loved about the language studies here was that it was usually taught by native speakers. And he said it's very important to have native speakers because they have an access that people who learn languages as a second language very often don't. And there is some truth to that, although there are those rare native learners outside that do that. So I genuinely believe that even though there have been great, great advancements in knowledge, grammar has morphed into linguistics, although the Muslims were onto that many centuries ago. You have extraordinary types of logic that have emerged. Boolean logic, Lord Russell introducing with Whitehead mathematical logic, symbolic logic, computer logic, fuzzy logic. You also have extraordinary advancements in mathematics. Rhetoric, yeah, I don't think rhetoric has moved that. I would say we've regressed in that area. But in any case, the liberal arts are rediscovered again and again. And this is why Dr. Van Doren called them the seven sleepers, the ones who, like the men in the cave, who fell asleep for 300 years. But they're constantly rediscovered, and the people who rediscover them fall in love with them and will spend their lives really trying to learn them and trying to use them, and then wanting to see others benefit from these great traditions. He says the liberal arts lie eastward of this shore, choppy the waves at first, then the long swells, and the being lost. Oh, centuries of salt, till the surf booms again and comes more land. Not even there, except that old men point at passes up the mountains, over which, oh, centuries of soil with olive trees for twisted shade and helicons for sound. Then eastward seas boned with peninsulas, then orient, the islands, and at last the cave, the seven sleepers, who will rise and sing to you in numbers till you know white magic, which remember, do you hear? O universe of sand that you must cross and animal the night, but do not rest. The centuries are stars and stud the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaykh Hamza, for a wonderful lecture. We will now transition into Q&A. If you'll give us a couple of minutes just to switch the stage. Please prepare your questions. We're going to be putting up a link. If you have a question, you can submit it through that link, and we will have people sifting through and filtering and sending us the questions that we deem best. I really encourage you to offer, this is the chance for the public to really engage in this forum, in this symposium. So please offer your questions, and we will try our best to consider them. Thank you. Lightning, as always. This will be your mic.
Okay. How are you doing? What's that?
You should drink water.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. These are fine. Yeah, these are fine.
All right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So we have some questions coming in. We'll start off with the questions we have. And then as you guys have questions, please submit them. And like I said, we have a team in the back that is working through those questions and will let me know once we have a significant amount. Okay. The first question we have, Shaykh, is how do you view the role of Muslims in guiding the ethical development of emerging scientific technologies, specifically artificial intelligence?
Just an easy question, yeah. I mean, I think AI is one of these really interesting events that's happening irrespective of what people think about it. They're just unrolling it. And I think that's one of the problems with a lot of the technology is there's not a lot of deliberation or thought that goes into it. Technology is not neutral. There's a lot of simpletons that actually think somehow technology is a neutral phenomenon, and then how we use it is simply up to us. Technologies, by their very nature, have behavior embedded in them. They have also power embedded in them. So if you take, for instance, nuclear power will centralize by its very nature. You can't have people building nuclear reactors in their backyards, right? Whereas solar power is a decentralizing type of energy. People can have solar power on their roofs, and then they get the power. There's people that live off the grid that there's people that live next to rivers, and they have these generators that they put in the river, and it generates water from the technology. So AI is something, I mean, I just had dinner, I was at the Vatican, and I was at a symposium on AI, and I was asked as one of the people to talk about the ethics of AI. And to be honest with you, like, I'm studying it now and trying to understand it. Quantum computers is also another area because quantum computing is developing. I mean, they're right across the road, MIT. You know, it's developing at a very rapid rate, and there's going to be this mergence between quantum computing and basic computing that's going to really enhance the power of computation. So I think about the kitty hawk. You know what kitty hawk is? No. Yeah. So Anybody remember Kitty Hawk? Nope. Yeah, the Wright brothers, thanks. So you know, like about 120 years ago, these two fellows down in the Carolinas, they built a glider that had like almost like a rubber band type thing, and they flew for like 30 seconds or something. And then you think of a stealth jet. Or I think of my grandfather who saw cars introduced into San Francisco, and now you think of the self-driving cars. So when you think of AI now, like they're just introducing it. It's only been around since the 1950s. So where's it going? Well, one person that I talked to, a physicist, and apparently he's a world-famous physicist, he told me it's going to eliminate the PhD dissertation, which might be a good idea, but he said it's going to eliminate it in quantitative sciences, that there will not be PhDs in that type of research because the AI, it works very algorithmically, but the conversation that I had with this man who's head of research at one of the main computer, like Microsoft type place, he told me that the computational power now is just so immense, and the power to imitate. And so these machines are learning, through programming, obviously. I mean, there's programming, but they are learning to imitate, and that's what they're trying to do. So quantum computing is trying to imitate nature. And so I don't know. Like, I got a call from an AI robot that sounded human. It initially passed the Turing test. But then I noticed something, and I said, "Are you a robot?" And it went, "Ha ha ha, do I sound that bad?" And then I was like, "Are you a robot?" And it said exactly the same thing. "Ha ha ha ha, do I sound that bad?" And I knew it was a robot. But they're going to work it out where it'll fool you. So I don't know. I mean, I think we should all be very troubled about these things. I'm worried about our young people growing up on all these machines. I've been talking about this since the 1990s. People thought I was crazy, thought I was a Luddite. I think everybody should read Elias's Under Technology's Thumb. You should read Langdon Winter, who was at MIT, who wrote Autonomous Technology. Read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. That's a good place to start. I mean, do we really know what we're doing? And I'm not a believer in determinism, in this idea that you can't stop progress. If it's killing you, you should.
If I may just ask a follow-up to that question, it comes down to this question of life, and what is life? If something imitates life, is it life? And what is that distinguishing factor, that definition, as you mentioned earlier in your talk? Can you talk to kind of what that definition could be?
Well, for us, life has to be infused by God with we have vegetable life, and then we have animal life, and then we have the highest, which is human life, rational life. So, I mean, there is an argument that Al-Razi made, Abu Bakr, that even inanimate things have a type of life. And I did read an interesting of Imam al-Rifa'i, who was somebody said that can't be true. And then when he dropped a plate, he heard the plate go, ouch. And they say it was a miracle of Imam al-Rifa'i. So, but there is in our tradition this idea of treating things gently, like not throwing things, like pens and anything. So you see Muslims have this concept of adab to creation. Like you have adab to creation, which has been lost on human beings, the way they throw things away. So I think the idea of AI having life or robots having life, I don't believe that. They can imitate and look like, the Jewish tradition has the golem, right? So they could create some kind of golem, but is it life? I mean, unless there was an embodiment of demons or something, who knows? I mean, I don't know. These are all really difficult things because we're all here in the same boat and people have different views about different things. But I would say, that the idea that it's thinking, I don't believe that. I think human beings, I don't, but I could be wrong. Because, if you pour water into a cup, is it drinking? Is the cup drinking? Is the boat swimming, the submarine swimming? I don't know. It depends on how you define thinking. But for us, thinking is, it's a very profound metaphysical truth that human beings uniquely think. I mean, we know that animals have some levels of perception and memory even. I mean, Aristotle talks about that. But thinking, the ability to abstract, Adam ﷺ was given the ability to abstract what's called tajreed. And Fakhruddin al-Razi mentions this in being able to name, which is why Muslims are essentialists in that way, that we believe that things do have essences. And that essence is what enables us to talk about universals. the universus, the one in the many. So you're able to particularize, you're able to universalize the particular, which is why, like in logic, it's very interesting. In our traditional logic, we always use singular. And I really appreciate the fact that I'm tooting his horn because you guys really have a gem over here, so I just want everybody to know this. But, you know, when you look at most modern logic books, they're not written properly because they make it, there's a fallacy in them. In all the traditional Latin and Arabic and Hebrew, they always use the singular. So they don't say all men are mortal. They will always say every man is mortal. They will say some animal is, because you have to particularize the universal in that premise, right? So that's what we're talking. The human being has this ability to abstract the one in everything. And that's why we're muwahidun by nature. It's what God has given us. We are designed to see the one in everything and ultimately to see the one behind everything. And that's why the Arabic word muwahidun means the one who makes one. When we say Allah is one, it's actually, we're doing it. Allah is one in reality, but to say tawheed is a wahada yuwahidu. It's the second form, right? So it's a transitive. You are making something one in your understanding. Yeah, and that is unique to the human being, and I don't believe a machine can do that. Although, when I asked Mr. Gill, who's a PhD from MIT and really at the edge of his field on this, I said to him, okay, if you put all the cats into the AI, and then you put like all these different cats, said, what's that? The AI said, oh, that's a tabby. What's that? Oh, that's a Russian blue. What's that? That's a Siamese cat. But then you showed it a cat where you shaved off all the fur, you cut its tail off, you cut its ears off. Horrible thing to do to a cat, but I'm doing this hypothetically. And then you cut off his whiskers, and you just showed the computer the cat. And I said, would the AI see the cattiness? Would it see the essence? You know, in the same way that as a human, you can see a Chihuahua and you can see a Great Dane, and I don't know how the mind does that, but you say that's the same thing, right? So he said yes. And he said yes. And if that's true, I don't know. It's amazing. I'd like to see it. He might have been just saying yes to...
All right, so great question to start us off. Let's move on to the next. The next question is, what are some of the main challenges to the Islamic tradition of learning in the Western contexts? How do you view the contradictions of the Western Academy and its approach to Islamic studies?
I think the biggest challenge is Arabic. And there's a very important book called Romancing an American Elite by Kaplan, which was about the inability to produce a really good Orientalist tradition in American academia, because the Europeans did it. I mean, the Europeans had Von Ess in Germany. I mean, Von Ess probably knew Ash'ari Kalam better than the vast majority of the. And I'm saying this not because I know Von Ess, because I know Sayyid Riyad, who's a brilliant Lebanese philosopher who was a student of Von Ess, and he told me that. So, and then you had people like Arbery. I mean, Arbery really knew Arabic. He knew rhetoric. He knew Arbery's translation of the Quran is amazing. So but Americans, I don't know. We have yet to produce like a really great Orientalist tradition, in my estimation. I mean, there are some great scholars. Dr. Abdullah Omar Farouk is certainly one of them. And then there's the ones that come from overseas, like Dr. Rawehib and Wa'il Hallaq, who grew up in with Arabic and things. But I think Arabic is a big challenge. Another challenge, I think, is the academia. Arabic studies has to allow for devotional. I think the idea. Secularism and secularity that demands on others its own presentation of reality is a type of religious ideology. And I think it's unfair to people who come from a different tradition to impose that. I mean, when I was in grad school, I used to get these papers saying you're essentializing. And I was like, I'm an essentialist. Like why is that methodology the only accepted methodology? One of the things that David Berlinski says, which is really interesting in his book called Human Nature, he said if you took a modern academic from a European or an American university and plumped him down into 13th century university, like in Paris, and he knows French, or in England at Oxford, in all the dogmatism of that time, he would acclimatize in a few days. But he said if you took that same academic and put him in Baghdad in the 10th century, he would be in a vertiginous state due to the incredible differences of opinions held by the scholars of that time. And I really think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, we've become so dogmatic in the West about things that we just assume are reality, and they're not necessarily reality. So I think I mean, Western academia has some amazing things. I read and benefit greatly from these things. I use JSTOR. I find really interesting things all the time. I mean, I found that about Chauncey on JSTOR. So, I mean, there's some great research and things done. I have a kind of idea of an academivotional approach, which is where it's academically rigorous, but it allows for devotional expression.
So in some sense, how do we allow for knowledge to be a means of devotion rather than kind of like an act or a vocation?
Yeah, I think knowledge for Muslims, knowledge is devotion. I mean, our Prophet said one of the signs of the latter days is people will seek knowledge for other than the sake of God. Our Prophet ﷺ also said that anything that does not begin in the name of God will be cut off from blessings.
And it's interesting to see in these university foundations, such as Cambridge and Oxford,
they're all founded on
Harvard
God.
and Yale and Columbia, and they're flourishing. And you wonder, is it in its foundation that there is barakah?
Well, one of the things that I think our civilization doesn't understand is that they think, a lot of modern people think it was all scaffolding. Religion was just the scaffolding that built all of these. But it wasn't. It was devotion. And if you take away the devotion, you lose your civilization. And I genuinely believe that every civilization before our civilization had some foundation of the sacred. Even the polytheists, had sacred sense of things of ultimate concern. Paul Tillich, who taught here at Harvard, said that even the cynic who believes that nothing is sacred holds that as sacred.
All right, we'll move on to the next question. We have students at Harvard who are studying Islam will generally have no training of the liberal arts that you mentioned, even though we are at the liberal arts college. What is your advice to such students already enrolled?
Yeah, grammar is best learned in grammar school. It's unfortunate that it's not taught there. If you want to understand why, there's a book by David Mulroy called The War Against Grammar. And, linguistics has kind of blown grammar out of the water. There's this idea that teaching grammar was not healthy for kids, that linguists who are closer to nominalists in their approach to language as opposed to essentialists who would see, for instance, essentialists would see maybe 8 or 9 parts of speech. Nominalists would say that's not true. There are thousands of parts of speech. So that's part of the problem. So when you study linguistics, you're just studying all these names for different things, whereas when you study traditional grammar, it really helps you understand what is an adverb, and knowing how an adverb works is really important. Knowing how it qualifies and what it qualifies and the different types of qualification. Determiners is probably an interesting word introduced because that's not an earlier word, but that comes out of linguistics, but it is a useful term, a determiner, which would have traditionally been an adjective. So I think learning grammar, I would get a good book on grammar. Kittredge and Farledge is a really good one, but I would find a good book and just go through it. Sister Marianne Joseph wrote a wonderful book called The Trivium. Eva Brand, a friend of mine and a really, truly great liberal artist who taught many years at St. John's. She's in her 90s now. She said, whoever owns that book owns a treasure, and I agree with her. It's a little difficult as a book. There's some nice books now coming out, and like I said, these get revived all the time. Rhetoric is not that difficult to learn. It's some of when you get into the schemes and figures, the names, because they're, they have all these Greek names like Anadiplosis and Hyperbaton. Hyperbaton is Yoda speak. So you can learn. You can learn that like Yoda. He'd said, "Much fear I sense in you." That's a Hyperbaton. So learning the terms. I don't know how useful that is, but literally knowing the most important ones. Like how alliteration works, what, the types of, in Arabic, majaz is very important, and what's called bayan is really important. So you have like majaz aqli, you have majaz lughawi, either isti'ara or mursal, and then you have the different types, like sababiyya, musababiyya. These are the problems with modern Arabs in the Muslim world who find all these poems to be like shirkiyat. It's because they never studied balagha. Anybody who studied balagha knows that to swear an oath, when Imam al-Busayri says, "Uqsimu bil-qamr al-munshaqi," like I swear an oath by the moon, there's a hadith, Busayri knew the hadith, whoever swears an oath, let him swear an oath by God or be silent. That's mahdhuf muqaddar. It's well known. You look in the commentaries. It's a rhetorical device, and there are many examples of that. In the Quran, there are many things. إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. That's there in the Quran. But Allah says also, إِنَّكَ تَهْدِي إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. You guide to a straight path. So in one verse he says you don't guide, and in another verse he says you guide. That's understanding rhetoric. Those will make sense. They're not contradictions. So these are really important tools. At Zaytuna, we teach both. So we teach the Western and we teach the Arabic tradition. So they do mantiq. If you're going to do Arabic logic and you're a non-Arab, I would recommend doing English first. There are some differences because of Avicenna, but generally they're very transparent subjects, especially at the most basic level.
So as a follow-up, this is in some sense bringing Harvard and Zaytuna together. Can you speak to how Zaytuna brings this kind of diversity of thought into its campus? I think we're increasingly seeing that on campuses, you're living in echo chambers, right? Diversity of thought, if anything, is being stifled.
Right.
So in what context is Zaytuna as a university allowing for diversity of thought in the modern world? Well,
I mean, that's a fantastic idea there, is that one, studying, revitalizing adab al-bahth wal munadara. Like, for instance, we have a tradition that there's two types of debate, what's called munadara and munakara. So munadara is dialectical, where each, like if I debate with Dr. Harun Spevek, and we're going to debate whether or not the Ash'aris are rightly guided or they're astray. So I'm the mu'allil and he's the sa'il, let's say. Like I'm the proponent, he's the opponent, or vice versa. In munadara, you're supposed to purify your intention, and you want the truth. You're not there to make the other person look bad. And so there's a whole adab of not being, not making fun of them, not laughing if they make a mistake, not just respecting your interlocutor. And it's a beautiful tradition. And it was considered fard ayn on anyone who was in debate. It's a fard kifaya of the later tradition. It's a collective that some people had to learn it. But for people who debate, it was considered an obligation on them to learn. And munakara is simply where one wants to, it's like the Raiders, my friend said the problem with Christian-Muslim debates is it's like the Raiders and the 49ers having a Super Bowl. You know, when the Raiders beat the 49ers, the 49er fans don't just all say, hallelujah, I've seen the light, I'm a Raiders fan now. They just, we'll get you next time. And that's what happens in those kind of debates. It's not to find the truth, it's just to kind of make fun of another person or so. And then you have ilzam and ifham. So if the person who's the proponent loses, he's mufham, like he has to accept, I was wrong, you're right. And one of the most beautiful statements in our tradition is Imam Shafi'i. He said, I never debated anyone except that I asked God that he would put the truth on my interlocutor's tongue so that I could submit to it. In other words, that the ego wouldn't have any part in it, because the ego wants to jump in there. So I think that would be really nice. We have to allow for debate. We have so many problems now with our community where people don't want to talk to each other anymore. We've taken these dogmatic positions of what's right and what's wrong. If we would restore some basic agreements about things, but we're living in an age of radical skepticism, a lot of relativism. You know, we have to get back to some foundational truths.
So just as a follow-up to that, I mean, you mentioned modeling what conflict, diversity of thought looks like through debate. And I think, you know, we're living in a time where those role models are non-existent, if anything rare. How do we find those role models? How do we, I mean, I think we can all say you're a role model in that respect. And building, I had the chance to visit Zaytuna. I think it models it in that respect. It is an ethos of sort that penetrates across multiple dimensions in the university. But how do we find those models in the local communities that we're in, right? Because it is one thing to teach something and read it in a book, and it is another thing to see it lived.
Right.
So how do we see it lived?
Well, we're living in an age where it's a lot, the people, like the type people that I saw when I was young, I don't see them anymore, in all honesty. Like, I really don't. And I know Sheikh Ma'shuq can say the same thing. You know, we saw, like Sheikh Ir, you know, the likes of that, Sheikh Mahmoud Effendi, these type people, very rare, you know, people now. Whereas there was a time in the Muslim world where there were a lot of people like that. So this is one of the tragedies of our time, is that it is getting harder to find. Even educated, I mean, we're not educated in the tradition in any sense. Like, the level that I understand between me and Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya or Murab al-Hajj, there's just no comparison whatsoever. I mean, I cannot compare myself to either of them. And just in terms of the vast amount of knowledge that they have and the wisdom that they're able to navigate that knowledge with.
Can you speak to what wisdom means?
Well, wisdom is, you know, hikmah is a beautiful word in Arabic, Sophia in Greek. Wisdom is, I mean, there are many definitions for it, but generally wisdom is when you have a sound intuition coupled with, you know, a true understanding, then you're able to make wise decisions. And God has given us a rational soul, but the rational soul, he's put this massive neocortex on a midbrain that's filled with emotions, and on a reptilian stem that's filled with fear and appetite. And so if we don't learn to navigate that triune brain, then we lose our way. And that takes work and effort. And that's where virtue ethics is so powerful, because it's something that, you know, habitus can be acquired, but it takes time. And you have people trying to do this out there. You have people like Ryan Halliday is a good example of somebody who's trying to teach people Stoic tradition and popularize it and try to help people deal, because the ancients, you know, they really did have great wisdom. And I think one of the problems with modern people is that they just don't think we can learn anything from the past. They think because Aristotle's physics was wrong, oh, it must mean his ethics is wrong. But the Nicomachean ethics speaks to us today. The politics speaks to us today. I mean, the politics has immense wisdom. Set aside what he says about women or what he says about natural slaves and things. You can get caught up in these things. But there are people of their time in some things, and then there are people of all time in other things. And if we don't learn how to sift through, you know, everybody has something to teach you, either through a positive or a negative experience. But everybody will teach you something if you're open to it.
So life is a university. Life is the liberal arts.
Alhamdulillah.
All right, we have about 15 minutes before we wrap up, so we'll maybe try to get some other questions. So this is actually an interesting one. So would you still, in the modern world of acceptability, still give rote memorization the same importance, or should the focus move more towards understanding?
Yeah, that is a great question. Memory is one of the 5 canons of Western rhetoric. Hifz is really important. You know, the Arabs say, عليك بالحفظ قبل الجمع من كتب فإن للكتب آفات تفرقها الماء يغرقها والنار تحرقها والفأر تخرقها واللص يسرقها, the Mauritanians say. Like, if you gather books, you should memorize them because they have certain faults that will ruin them. And then he says water, and my wife knows and I know I never put any water near books, ever. Like tea, never. Don't think you can do it. Like if you have a book, you have books on a thing, you put your cup of tea there, it's doomed. And I speak from bitter experience. Yeah. So water, and then he says fire will burn them. Although I'll tell you a true story, and God's my witness. Really, God is my witness. Many years ago, I was with a person from Libya who was a dissident opposing Gaddafi, and I was staying with him. And we left the car, and I left 2 books in the front seat. The Quran, it was leather bound, really beautiful leather bound, and Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani. This is like 40 years ago. I was studying the Risala and doing memorization of Quran. And Gaddafi, somebody from Libya, they bombed the car, and it blew up. He lives in Santa Fe. I'm not making this story up. So I was so worried. When we got back to the car, the whole inside of the car was burnt up except for the Quran and the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd. Like there was nothing left. It was just thing, and it was paper. It's a true story. Yeah, I saw it. People can believe it or not, but I believe it. I saw it. So that's what they said. And then the rat or the worm will eat it, and the thief will steal it. And Imam al-Ghazali had his famous experience that he tells in his Inqadh, in his Inqadh min al-Dalal, that when he had gone to Central Asia and learned all this knowledge and had written everything down, and he was on a caravan coming back, and the thief was going to steal all his books. He said, no, you can't steal my books, that's my knowledge. And the thief laughed, and he said, what kind of knowledge is that somebody like me could steal it from you? And Imam al-Ghazali said, "Antaqahu Allah alladhi antaqa kulla shay." It was God who made him speak. And he said, after that, I never learned anything except that I put it to rote memorization. So while I think our society's gone to the other extreme where memorization is not important, you could look it up, but don't we know that the best teachers we have tend to be the ones with the most prodigious memories, the ones that seem to retain a lot of things? I mean, that's just our experience. So memory is a beautiful thing. It's one of the gifts. It's best done in what Dorothy Sayers, in her famous essay on the liberal arts, calls, on the trivium, calls the parrot stage. Memory is best done when children, I had my children memorize a lot of things and poems and things. And they, like my son, when he was in college, he went to Amherst, and he was with his college friends. And they were there, and I had made him memorize a lot of Emily Dickinson. So he was there reciting all this Emily Dickinson poems, and they were all shocked at it. But it was a very memorable experience for him and for the other young men that he was with. You know, there's something beautiful about having a poem in your heart. You know, they say I memorize it by heart. You know, it's very powerful. You know, I mean, the poem of it's the most famous poem quoted or anthologized in American poetry. Two woods diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and people want to travel long, I stood to where I bent to the undergrowth. that poem, which I memorized many, many years ago, because my dad memorized a lot of poetry, I've thought about that poem a lot. And I was walking once with my wife, and we came to a split in the woods, and the poem came to mind, so I started reciting it, and I had read a whole book on this poem, which I hated because I thought the guy completely misinterpreted the poem. But I was thinking about what that poem meant, and then I realized what it meant, you know. When he repeats the I, you know, I took the one less traveled by, I realized that poem's about free will, and that's what he was saying that makes the difference of being human, is actually actualizing your free will, because most people are on a kind of default setting. That's my interpretation. Somebody else could come with a different one. But had I not known that poem by heart, I could not have had that experience. Yeah, so, and that's happened to me many times. I was with my boys once. We were there, and we were sitting, and there was a man there, a young man, a little older than they were, and I asked him what he was doing. He said, nothing much, just kind of, you know, just taking some time off. I said, are you going to school? He said, I'm thinking about it. I don't know really what I want to do. But I'm just, you know, kind of playing around. That's what he said. So when he left, I read to my boys, be strong. We are not here to play, to dream, to drift. We have work to do and loads to lift. Shun not the struggle, face it, 'tis God's gift. You know, so that was, like, they memorized that poem. So I really feel like memory is a beautiful thing. It's an important thing. And I memorize every day something. Every day. I don't let a day go by without memorizing something.
Yeah, no, that's, I have so much to think about personally about memorization in that context. And I think to kind of circle back to AI, is AI kind of removing that effort that it takes to kind of retain and hold on to wisdom, to truth. So we have several questions in here, and I'm trying to pick what I think would be most and I want to be respectful of these questions. So one of the questions is it not beneficial to bypass the tradition to escape the biases of the past that have become so solidified?
I mean, that's a great question. There's no doubt that there are things in the tradition that need to be jettisoned. It's who has the wisdom to determine, because people can follow their own passions and want to get rid of things that are. So I think the challenge of our generation is determining what I would call, I mean, this is not a popular word, but what I would call transhistorical. Those things in the tradition that are transhistorical, that transcend every time and place, and then those things that are of their time and place. So I think that's really important. But I think for me, renovation is the key, because I really genuinely believe the house is solid, but you know, the pipes are rusty, the plumbing needs replacement, you know, the faucets aren't working anymore, but you don't destroy the house and kind of try to rebuild something new. So I really think that, I mean, this is the beauty. We just read, in my book club, we read The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. And one of the most important things that he points out in there, and he at the very end of that book, he has all these traditions saying very similar things. So I really do believe there are universals that are very important that all of us share. Identifying those, what we call a thawabit in Islam, you know, those things that are fixed. And then there's the mutaghayyarat, those things that change with time and place. So I think Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya is one of the few people that I know that is capable of navigating that, because he's such a encyclopedic master of the tradition, and yet at the same, I mean, I'll give you an example. I was asking him about canceling culture, you know. That was very interesting. Like, I was asking him about people that feel hurt or sensitive, and he just started talking about darar and the concept of darar, and he said, you know, the basis of our tradition is la darar wa la darar. Don't harm people and don't reciprocate harm once it was done to you. And he said people should be sensitive to other people's concerns, you know, sensibilities, really. You shouldn't go out of your way to offend people, which some people really enjoy doing. And then he said, but on the other side of that, he said, our tradition teaches us, وَاصْبِرْ عَلَى مَا يَقُولُونَ, be patient with what they say, you know, and صَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ وَاللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانُ, you know, all those things about, like, not taking offense, you know, at-taghadi, at-taghaful. The Prophet ﷺ talked about taghaful, you know, pretending not to understand. And one of my favorite hadiths is when they called him mudhammam, which means the blameworthy. It's in al-Bukhari. He said, isn't it wondrous how God has removed their tongues from me? They call me, they're calling someone named mudhammam, and I'm Muhammad. So it's like he just didn't give them any reality, as opposed to these Muslims like flipping out at the slight, this poor woman in Minnesota or somewhere with the painting. You know, I mean, what's going on? Like, where Muslims have become so sensitive. She wasn't denigrating. If you don't denigrate the Prophet, tanqis is one thing, but she was showing Persian art written by a scholar. There's a difference of opinion. It's a very weak opinion, but there is an opinion. There's actually a hadith Imam Ibn Kathir relates of the man who, Hisham ibn al-As, who was sent by Abu Bakr to Syria, and he met Herakl, and Herakl took him into a room and pulled out these boxes that were covered with black, and each one he took out a statue. And the first one he said, do you know who that is? He said, no. He said, it's Adam. And he looked at it amazed. He said, it had a long neck. And then he took the next one. He said, do you know who that is? He said, no. He says, Ibrahim. And then the next one he took out, he said, do you know who that is? He says, Musa. And then finally he gets to, do you know who that is? He said, that's my prophet. That's Muhammad. And it was a statue of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is in Bayhaqi and Dalail al-Nabuwa. Ahmad ibn Hanbal relates it. None of them condemned the taswir. Not one of them condemned the taswir. Abu Bakr, it said, and Ibn Kathir says, هذه رواية لا بأس بها. And it's mentioned in many scholars mention this. Hisham said when he told Abu Bakr, he wept to hear that. So in the Maliki madhab, even a statue, as long as it's not three-dimensional, it's only one side of a person, it's makruh. It's not haram. The Malikis are the most lenient on pictures. And that's why, like, if it's abstract, it's permissible. Like, abstract sculpting would be permissible in Sharia. So, like, on the frieze in the Washington, D.C. at the Supreme Court, you know, there's a symbol there symbolizing the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. I don't want to see that taken down. But there's Muslims saying, this is, you know, speak for your own, like, speak for yourself. You're not speaking for all Muslims. They honored, that wasn't for tanqis, it was for ta'zim. They're saying he's one of the great lawmakers in the world. And it's not the Prophet. You know, Sayyidun Lapip, you know, the famous Magritte picture of the pipe that says this is not a pipe. You know, a picture is not the thing. Don't get caught up. So we have that problem in our community. We need more maturity.
All right, we'll wrap it up with two more questions. The one here, and I'm going to let you take it as you wish, but I would like to ask it on behalf of whoever did ask it. In our hyper-partisan society, how do you recommend American Muslims engage with the political system in this country, particularly as our faith does not align with either political party?
Right. I think it's important for Islam not to be associated with a party. I mean, it can't be Democratic, it can't be Republican. I think we should learn from our Jewish brethren and sisters. The Jewish community, when I went to Russell Moore's Southern Baptist Convention, Dr. Sanusi and I were the only Muslims there. And they had on the table like books like Islam and Satanism, and I mean, it was pretty bad, you know. But anyway, we went, and they gave me an opportunity to talk, and they had one man who'd written a book against Islam, and he gave his thing, and I said, I'm sorry, you know, I've spent my life studying this religion. The type of stuff you're talking about is just wrong. And I refuted it. And But then we went to shoulder to shoulder. But my point is in that meeting there were Orthodox rabbis. Then we went to shoulder the same day, which is a more left-leaning group. And then there were the liberal rabbis there. And so I think Muslims are foolish to kind of condemn people on one side, and you know, they should recognize that it's good for Muslims to be in any, you know, they say if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. You know, it's a high possibility. So it's always good to have Muslims present. You know, I was lucky, I met Dr. Marianne Glendon, who's a professor emeritus from Berkeley, but I was one of the commissioners with her, and I genuinely believe the fact that I was in that room, conversations changed. Because if there's no Muslims in there, then they can say things about Islam that when there's a Muslim there. I mean, one of our traditions is whenever you're going to talk about somebody, to imagine them in the room, just to avoid backbiting, you know? So it's the same idea. If you have a Muslim present, it's very good. That's why I'm glad there's Muslims in Harvard. We should have Muslims in all over. It's a globalized world. The Muslims aren't going away. We've been here from the start, you know. So there were Muslims in America early on. We had that beautiful Fulani man Yaro Mahmoud, you know, who in Georgetown, he used to walk reciting Quran. They said he used to walk, and that's the way the West Africans do it. They walk at night after Maghrib and they call them surat. You know, they recite the Quran. And he made his own Fulani hat and everything. Beautiful man. He was here. Peale, the great painter who painted George Washington, painted him. He said originally he intended to spend one day with him. He ended up spending like several days with him because he enjoyed him so much. But he was here from the start with the founding fathers. We have people on the rosters, Muslims that fought in the Revolutionary War with Americans. They're on the rosters. Their names are on the rosters. So Islam is an American religion. It's always been here. We had an American captain, Bafus Muhammad, who was a Civil War captain. He's the highest ranking Muslim in the Civil War. He was African American. So the Muslims have been around. They've been around, not going anywhere. We're actually good neighbors generally. I mean, there's crazy Muslims, but there's crazy everything. You know, like, I mean, some of the worst human beings don't believe in anything, right? I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer, like, what did he believe in? You know, eating your neighbor? Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Barakallah fikum. It's been such a pleasure. That was the last one?
That we can call it a last one. Yes.
Was there one more?
There's one that I will wrap it up with if you'll answer one more.
Okay.
And that is, so someone asked, and I hope this can maybe be important for this person, but they said, is God dead? And to add on to that question, what is the role of love? How do you get to know God through love? How do you love the Prophet in a time? I don't think we're not taught that in some contexts. So just the relationship between God and love, and if you could speak to that as a final kind of concluding remark.
Yeah. So, I mean, that obviously comes from Nietzsche, who was a very interesting character, who, you know, I guess it was 1882 maybe in the Gay Science. Yeah, I think so. Was it the Gay Science? He said it in Thus Spake Zarathustra, but I think he said it before that in the Gay Science. Yeah? Yeah, okay, thanks. Inshallah. Good.
That's Zaytuna representing right there.
So you know, so God in 1900 said Nietzsche is dead. Yeah. So anyway, you know, look, I mean, God can die in the hearts of people, and that's a tragedy, you know, and that's why, I mean, Abu Bakr said that amazing thing when the Prophet ﷺ died. He said, "In kuntum ta'budun الرسول فإن الرسول قد مات إن كنتم تعبدون الله فالله حي لا يموت." You know, if you worship Muhammad, he's dead. But if you worship God, God is living and never dies. So I think, you know, it's a choice everybody has to make. It's an amazing choice. You choose on meaning or you choose on meaninglessness. If you choose on meaninglessness, obviously you can attempt some existential way of finding meaning in your life. Some people do it through literature. Some people do it through music. Some people do it through gluttony, hedonism, sexuality. There's lots of ways to fill the void, but they're all empty, and they never lead to satiation. And it's our belief, "Ala bi dhikri tatma'innu al-qulub," as Augustine said, that God created our hearts so that they would only rest in God. And so the heart, by its very nature, is restless until it finds God. Rumi talks about the grain in the oyster that irritates the oyster and finally becomes a pearl, that he says that's what's in the human heart. There's an irritation which, until we find God, we're not at peace. So I think there's a lot of interesting evidence now. I'm a big fan of Stephen Meyer and some of the people that are doing cutting edge microbiology, and the idea that the evidence for design is not like the old kind of creationist school of design from Seattle, that the evidence for design is becoming pretty overwhelming. So Theistic Evolution is a really interesting book edited by Stephen Meyer. And I think these are areas where Muslims and Christians and Jews and people that do believe in God can really look to as sources. The Muslims never tried to prove God's existence. What they wanted to do, and Aquinas' 5 ways, were never meant to prove God's existence, in my estimation. What they were meant to do is to show believers that it is a rational proposition to believe in God. It's not irrational, but it's not beyond a reasonable doubt. In our legal system, you have criminal evidence, and then you have civil evidence. Civil evidence, the best of it is clear and compelling evidence. That criminal evidence is beyond a reasonable doubt. For Allah has made the world so that He's given us clear and compelling evidence, but it's not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's left there for faith, and that's the difference. But I do think it's a stronger proposition, and that's why that's the one I'm on that side. Jazakumullah khair. And thank you so much for all the patience, and may Allah bless all of you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. So really quickly, we'll have a dua, but I want to quickly acknowledge some people in the room. We have the wife of Shaykh Hamza with us, who is a pillar to our community as well, and who has offered us all support through the support she offers Shaykh, alhamdulillah. We have Dr. Subhani, the Vice President of Harvard, joining us as well with her husband. And we have Dr. Umar and Shaykh Mashouk with us also here from Zaytuna. So please grant them one more round of applause and a welcome on behalf of Harvard. And finally, I'd like to have Chaplain Khalid offer a closing dua. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Let's close with a quick dua together, quick prayer. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Ya Allah, we praise you. We ask for your blessings, your guidance. We ask that you bind our hearts. We ask that you make us purveyors of knowledge, students of knowledge. We ask that you endow us with wisdom, with character, with love, and allow us to be excellent stewards of this knowledge, to serve our teachers and our parents and our loved ones, and to make us guiding lights for ourselves in this life and for others as well, for in this life and in the next. Ameen. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace and blessings be with you.